Welcome to Podcast Awesome, where we chat about icons, design, tech, business, and nerdery with members of the Font Awesome team.
Font Awesome, go make something awesome. Font Awesome, go make something awesome.
I'm your host, Matt Johnson, and today I'm joined by the fabulous Font Awesome design team. Really, it's just two people. Jory, Raphael, and Noah, Jacobus. We talk about their approach to design and their philosophy of design. Is it a process? Is it not a process? Listen in and you decide.
Go make something awesome. Font Awesome, go make something awesome. Font Awesome, go make something awesome.
We're talking about design process today, and I thought it would be nice to take some time to pick your guys' brains about that. Design process, how do you think about that in a broad sense?
That's a great question. Noah's kind of tilting his head towards me. I'll take this one. Jeez. For the longest time, I don't know that I necessarily had a design process, or if I did, it was kind of by accident, or I would hear someone say, like, I felt like I needed to have one. Let me put it that way, where it was an expectation that, when you're writing, in the olden days, when I'd write client proposals, they would often ask for what the process was. And sometimes it'd be like, I'd make it up because it was never codified in my mind, because the creative process in general is so, by its very nature, amorphous and all over the place. If we're thinking about icon design in general and icon design at Font Awesome, the process is, this is going to sound like a cheap answer, but as little process as we need. I guess it's different when we are designing a new icon that's going to go into the existing Font Awesome icon set, or if we are thinking through an entirely new icon style or things like that. Because at this point, when I sit down, at least, and Noah, you can correct me if I'm wrong or if you have a different approach to this, but the rules around designing an icon for Font Awesome are so kind of baked into my bones at this point that I just kind of know, I sit down and I draw. And that's kind of it. In some cases, I will sketch things out by hand beforehand if it's a complicated enough icon or problem. But in a lot of cases, I just literally sit down and draw in Figma and move points around until it feels right, and then step away from it and come back and look at it again, or share it with Noah, and he'll have some feedback on placement of something. And we also kind of have a rhythm. I'm talking a lot, so I'll shut up in a second. But we also have a rhythm where sometimes I will design something, take a kind of a first pass at it, kick it across the fence to Noah, and he'll go in and tweak it and improve it generally, in most cases, and maybe kick it back over, and I'll make a few minor tweaks. So it's kind of collaborative when it needs to be, and isn't when it doesn't need to be. Mm-hmm. And that is a lot of word salad and vomit. So I'm going to shut up.
You said I could tell if you were wrong, and you are. No, but actually, yeah, my process is very similar. I mean, to your point, but having so many rules already figured out for Font Awesome, it does speed up the process considerably, because you're not having to spend a lot of time spinning up stylistic rules for the most part. Really, the only real time and effort comes in, as you said, with complex stuff, if you're having to figure out maybe how to bend some of the existing rules to fit whatever the new thing is you're trying to do. But I often just hop right in and start. That is my sketching process, is digitally drawing right in the program itself. And it's interesting being on this end of that process for the most part in this job, because in a past life working at an agency, that was almost always the front end of it, which is a different process that I had to kind of codify, of figuring out, all of our time was spent figuring out what the rules are for the minimum viable set, and spinning that up as quickly as possible, and then not being able to expand on it any further. So it's really nice to kind of experience the other side of the coin and maintaining and fleshing things out.
I imagine too, depending on what you're designing, of course, the process is going to look a lot different. When you're just sitting down to do icons, you have a few different parameters, and you can sort of take it one step at a time, whatever your style of process is. But if you're doing UI elements or things like that, you might map it out quite a bit differently.
Right.
It could be more involved.
Yeah, that's true. Because when I'm designing, when we're working on the product itself or our website or the flow that our customers are using to grab icons, we will do sketching, like
Right.
actually very high level sketching, and we call it fat marker sketching, where like the actual goal is to be as low fidelity as you can. Use a big fat marker, and I'll do it on my iPad, but I set the the width on the pencil tool or whatever to pretty big, and you're just kind of generally sketching out flows and placement so that you can kind of keep your mind in that free state where you're not being too prescriptive, because it's really easy to like get down into the weeds and want to, you mentioned a button, like you want to look at a button and tweak the corner radii or change the padding or drop shadow or whatever, and you can really get into the weeds pretty quickly. So kind of knowing where you are in the process is helpful. And I think with icon design, we just happen to, with Font Awesome icon design anyway, for most of our stuff, we happen to be able to kind of skip a bunch of steps and jump to the end because we kind of have already done all that work originally.
Right. And I can see how the process of something creative, I mean, not even necessarily creative, but the process of creating something, I guess makes it automatically creative.
Are you saying that word too many times? Has it lost its meaning?
Yes.
Create.
Yes. Create the creative creation. But I can see how process could sort of fit into any of that. I'm thinking in terms of, as a writer, when I write a blog, I may not outline anything. I might just start going, and then I flesh it out as I go. If I'm writing a longer essay, I need to do a little bit more planning, and at least start with like a premise and put some headlines in there. If I'm writing a short book or something, it's a totally different process. So some of that creation process doesn't necessitate a lot of steps or process, whereas something bigger, if you're building a site, you're going to want to sketch it out. We talked like really broadly, but then if you zero in a little bit on, I don't know, different things you might create, like when you approach an icon, or if you're approaching how to lay out like UI or whatever, you would take different approaches and use different kinds of tools. We use Figma, and the actual tool itself is going to inform how you create because of what's built into the tool. We've talked a little bit before in a separate podcast how we moved from Illustrator to Figma. Maybe you could just give an overview of what makes Figma so great and how that helps you approach icon design.
Sure. Well, Figma is primarily built to be an interface design tool. So it is at its core much more suited towards doing, web layout and that kind of thing, or app design. That is what it is primarily made for. But there are surprisingly some pretty robust vector drawing tools that are baked into that as well. And so it was that capability kind of coupled with some of its features that are more product focused, things like components and variants and things when you're building out a design system and need, 50 different kinds of buttons and cards and whatever else. Some of those features that actually lend themselves really well to creating an icon design system, especially one like ours that has so many different repeating pieces that need to be reused and things that modify other icons and stuff like that. So that's that, and its collaborative features, which is something that Illustrator didn't have at the time, maybe still doesn't. I haven't really kept up with it. Just kind of made it a no-brainer for that, especially once we started adding more folks who needed to access all that stuff at the same time.
Yeah, and it's become kind of a source of truth, for all of our icons. So I guess I'll use an icon that I'm currently working on right now. So I'm trying to make a Tyrannosaurus Rex icon. And the process for me to make that icon has been, I go into Figma, and we have all of our existing icons in Figma. Noah actually recently created another dinosaur icon that is like a long neck dinosaur. Not a Brontosaurus. Is a Brontosaurus a real dinosaur? Wasn't there one that
they keep changing it?
There's one dinosaur that I used to have a name that they said is not actually real or something.
It's a land before time dinosaur.
Yeah. So this is a long neck. This is a dinosaur. And so Noah made this great dinosaur icon. So the very first thing I did was I'm making another dinosaur icon. So I'm going to grab the icons that Noah did. I'm going to pull them into just another page in our animals, nature and animals Figma file. And then I actually pulled in some other animals. So I pulled in the elephant, and I pulled in a few things because the goal is to make a new icon that fits visually with those two others. or with all of our other ones. But those I was using like the elephant and the long neck dinosaur as kind of my touch points. And so I start just, kind of sketching out in Figma, using blocks, sketching out and drawing shapes that kind of generally represent a tyrannosaur. I'll go on, image search on the web and find examples of illustrations or, photos. Back when they took photos of dinosaurs, way back when.
Yeah.
Realistic photos.
They're a little grainy, but
Yeah. And pull the old Polaroids up. And so you kind of create from that and from the existing icons kind of a mood board, if you will, of what you're trying to go for. And you just start drawing. And that is like just a process of like trial and error, honestly, where I'm drawing a leg and moving it here, moving it there. And, on top of that, we also have the issue of our artboard size because the icons have to work within a certain number of constraints. And so the Tyrannosaurus tends to be a little bit of a taller, icon, but our icon artboard is a little wider. So you have to find a way like you can bend, or is it squatting, or is it what position it is in to make it work? And then it, does it look like it's pooping instead of standing up instead of what? So it's hard. And the icon is honestly, it's not done yet. And I mentioned earlier that I want to kick that over the fence so that Noah can take a stab at, using what I started and maybe and ultimately make it better. Yeah, that's the process. We just draw it and tweak it until it's mostly right. And at some point we have to kind of throw in the towel and just like, okay, we're going to ship this one. And for different icons, there are kind of different inflection points and some are easier than others.
Do you ever ship something knowing that you've spent enough time on it, but you're going to come back to it because it needs something, but you're not sure what it is yet?
Yes, all the time.
Yeah,
with the caveat that I don't always know that I'm going to come back to it. Like it has to. There are definitely icons that we have in our set today that are good enough, and
good enough is not good enough, Jory. I want you to get back in there.
Well, you say that, but yeah, I mean, and occasionally we'll go in and we'll update them. We actually recently redesigned a bunch of our animal icons to make them cuter.
I was thinking of that, yeah.
So that's an example of ones that some of those I released and I was like, I don't know if I love them, but they're almost there. And you get to the point where you're spending so much time on them that you're not spending time in other places.
Right. Right. Especially in things that are sort of visually similar, because then if you make one change, you're like, well, I really need to update all the rest, and they can snowball. So.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm picking up is that there are going to be a category of dinosaur icons coming our way. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah. I don't know if a full category, but they're,
okay.
If 2 icons constitute a category, sure.
Maybe. We are slowly but surely building out the paddocks, and we will have
Can I get a pterodactyl?
Jurassic Park. We could. I think the width would support some sort of a winged beast, a pterodon of some kind.
What's interesting to me is we started this kind of talking about design process and what ours is, and in the creative world, I think there is this idea that you have to do something in one way in a lot of cases,
right.
But you'll look at a designer, you look at someone's finished piece of art or finished icon or finished design, and if you look at their actual art file, and you kind of zoom out and you see mine's a mess. I've got things all over, and I think that's one of the reasons I love quote unquote sketching in something like Figma, because you can draw something, quickly duplicate it, do a variation, go back, make little tweaks. And it's just like throwing stuff against the wall and moving things around and trying different things. And you've got an undo button, and you're not kind of locked into anything, which is lovely.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with a messy process. This makes me think of, if you go to Guitar Center and you talk to the guy at the guitar counter, and he knows all about the gear. He knows all about the history of the gear. He knows how the circuits and pedal boards work and all that stuff. You do not want to go to that guy's concert. You don't want to see his band. And not to,
This is one guy in particular you're talking about, isn't it?
Not really. I think it's just sort of across the board. The point is that people who have an overly tidy process sometimes get enamored with the tools, and it makes their creative process too stiff, I guess. I guess there are some people that probably have lots of processes and tools and are fantastic at what they do.
And there's also, I think, a level of expertise too, where you get to a point where some things you could just do really quickly and you have it down. You know, I think it's pretty easy for both Noah and I to design a house icon at this point.
Speak for yourself.
or the, you know, a very simple version of a house icon. So, you know, so some things go really quickly, and then some things like this dinosaur icon I'm working on is kicking my butt, and it makes me feel bad at my job and like a bad artist. And I have faith that we'll get there at some point. Let me ask you a question, Noah.
Yes.
Talking about design process, do you, when you sit down and you're like, I have this bunch of icons I'm doing, I know there's probably a different state that you're in when you are at the start of a project versus when we are like, right now, one of the icon sets you're working on, you're kind of filling in the gaps and you're kind of like working through it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do anything differently between those two states? Do you have any, you know, environment that you're setting up for yourself, either acoustically or visually or?
Nope.
Love it.
All right, folks. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, I actually do. I find that history and rules, as say when we're working on, you know, vanilla font awesome, and, you know, needing to keep in mind the history of 30,000 other things that we need to kind of match. So like my scratch page on some of that new stuff is just full of, you know, half-baked things. And I'm like, I might still need this. I'm just going to keep it in case, you know, the version of this icon doesn't pan out. I want to go back to what it was before, and keeping all of that stuff kind of collected, and also kind of keeping a lot of the basic building blocks like handy at all times and like right there, because I'm constantly re-referencing them and pulling them in to build out new things. So it's kind of like, I feel like it's kind of constantly building an IKEA shelf, and I've like got the instructions there all the time, and I'm just constantly like rearranging pieces and trying out different things. Thankfully, no missing parts, like is often the case.
All the screws are there.
All the screws are there.
No
I can
shelf
make
is
new
gonna
screws
fall
if
down.
I need to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a significantly more jumbly process.
Do you do anything, and this is a little leading because I do something in these regards, but do you do
You
anything?
said do.
And it won't be the last time. In your greater environment outside of the computer itself, do you prefer to, you know, light yourself a candle when you're really diving into an icon set, or, you know, have a particular cup of tea, or?
I have found, in terms of the audio choices, when I am doing much more creative intensive things. So if I'm needing to generate a lot of brand new rules and content, I can't listen to anything with lyrics. For whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's the same when I'm writing. And
Yep.
maybe that's the same for you. Yeah.
Yep.
Where whatever part of the brain that's tapping into is the same as like linguistics for me. And so if I'm doing something that I know I can knock out pretty quick, and it's like, oh, whatever, I'm making a house, and then I can listen to whatever and it's not going to affect me. But whatever cross-pollination synesthesia that is for me, I have to be like either dead quiet or like light instrumentals.
I almost burned my house down with the candle routine. Had my desk set up all nice, and I had this real nice musky candle that I would light, and I'd put on the ambient music.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering,
When you're writing?
yeah, sometimes, yeah, I have sort of a thing that I do. I was looking at my external monitor one day, and I was like, why is it misshapen at the bottom?
Oh, no.
And I realized I'd put my candle directly under my monitor and it melted part of it.
Jeez.
So be careful, folks.
Yeah, but it was the best writing you'd ever done.
It
wasn't
was. I mean, I
Yeah.
was on fire.
It's funny because I'm kind of the same way. Like when I'm writing, I find that like listening to something like Baroque music actually helps, because it does do that little disconnect where I can kind of, it helps me focus in a certain part of my brain to write things. But when I'm designing icons, when I'm doing the production work of icon design versus the well, even some of the creative stuff, even like with the dinosaur where I'm just trying to throw a bunch of things out against the wall, I often will put like a movie or a TV show on my little side monitor that I can kind of pay half attention to, or a show that I've seen before, or like an action movie or something that, you know, really isn't good, or you know, doesn't require too much brain power to enjoy. And I find that just having that little thing going off on the side that every now and then I can just look over at and switch my attention briefly helps me just get into a zone where I can draw. which is weird, I think, to have a show, something visual going on when I'm trying to do something visual, but it works for me and kind of gets me into a little bit of a Zen state sometimes.
It's different strokes for different folks. I mean, for some people, that would be a nightmare. They can't multitask like that. They need to focus. But I think everybody has to figure out what works for them,
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a connection between working in a more freeform creative way when a more structured thing is happening nearby. Because thinking about Baroque music, for example, and having studied that in college, and how very rigid and highly structured it is. Like the forms, the use of dynamics, the instrumentation, everything is locked down tight. And so being able to have something that is incredibly built out and structured happening in your periphery,
Yeah.
or maybe even a film that you already know the structure of, if it's something you're familiar with and it's kind of a comfort watch or something that you don't really have to pay attention to. I wonder if there's something there that is like, this is something that is easily digestible and I already am familiar with, or something that is very structured and already makes a lot of sense that allows you to.
I
Flesh
absolutely believe that's true. I mean, you look at the, I forget the name of it, but like you'll see those like sand patterns. Like when you do sand and you're playing certain tones or music or certain whatever, they'll adjust themselves into different states. And that has to happen in your heads as well. If you're listening to a certain thing and you kind of just get, your neurons firing in the correct direction or something.
There's got to be brain science to this stuff for sure.
Get on at MIT, figure it out.
Yeah. We're not the people to dive into that science, but we just draw small pictures, Matt.
Small pictures. And it's a process. There is a process and there's not a process.
And it all boils down to probably my favorite responses on Twitter and social media, when it's always those questions of like, should designers blank or whatever? It's just, it depends, man.
It depends.
It's the same with process.
Maybe, sure, no, yes.
And especially when, process is vastly different if it's just you versus if it's you and another person or a team, or, thinking about what we talked about with icons, versus product design or, web design. It's, if you have more people that you need to communicate information to, that's a vastly different process. Probably needs to be more rigid, more documented. Versus when, it was just you making icons, and that's when Illustrator worked mostly okay for you because,
Yeah. And when there were fewer icons and fewer styles, I mean, we're struggling a little bit with that whole idea with our company as a whole right now. We have almost 20 people now. When I started, there were only 5 or 6 of us. And what works when there's a smaller, group of people doesn't work necessarily as well when there are more people. And there's always the question of like, how much is too much, how much scheduling, how many meetings. And we always err on the side of less is more. And, honestly, like some of the things that drew me to this company in the first place, and I'm sure others would say the same, is kind of the way we do things a little bit differently. Just some of that doesn't scale quite as well. And I know there are other companies that have the same issue. And so we're just trying to we put in as much process as we need to.
Yeah.
And that's constantly evolving and constantly changing. I mean, right now we're at the Snuggle. Our twice yearly Snuggles are, we are, as we grow, we're finding I think this one has been pretty successful. There's some things that might change, but we actually put a schedule in place for the first time. It was still open. We had a lot of free time, but it was like at this time, in this time block, we're generally going to be doing this. And in this time block, we're generally going to be doing that. That never used to be the case.
Right.
And it just kind of knowing what to expect is helpful, I think, for some folks, and gives it there. Like we're recording this right now because we put it on the calendar.
Whereas last time we just kind of went by the seat of our pants, like, hey, anybody want to go over there and podcast?
Yeah. And you've probably recorded a lot more this trip than you did last time.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
So we are playing around with some new icon styles right now that are outside of the kind of the classic and the sharp icons that we currently have at Font Awesome. And so that's a different process than what we've been doing, how we would go in and build new icons for Font Awesome as is. And you recently, Noah, I did a little bit, but you mainly recently spent some time like at a very high level, exploring different visual directions we could take these styles. How did that feel? Was that fun? Was that a break from the current way of doing things?
Very much a break. And it was a whole ton of fun because when you're designing icons, no matter what, new stuff, old stuff, there's always different visual ideas that are kind of rattling around in your head, or that you see something out in the world that inspires you to be like, I wonder if, what this would be like, or seeing something that maybe you feel could have been accomplished a little bit better in some way, or something you never got to try in a client project because it's a little wild or a little out there and doesn't really match a brand per se. Over years, I've collected a lot of different visual ideas, and it might just be like one word, and that I'd have a general idea of what that might mean or how that might be fleshed out. And so, yeah, we had the time recently to be able to kind of write all these things down and just be like, hey, we have the time. Let's just explore some of these things. If we were to flesh out a whole icon set in this style, what would that look like? And being able to kind of going through multiple layers of a process of very high level sketching things out, seeing if something even has legs to function, and being able to drill down and start setting up rules and having feedback back and forth and everything. So it's kind of been an interesting microcosm of a design process at many different layers, and it's been a ton of fun.
And there's a weird, at least I find, because I dabbled in it a little bit, there's this weird freedom that you get. We try and produce things as a company. We try and ship features and ship new icons and stuff. But there's every now and then taking a step back and just kind of doing a brain dump, a visual brain dump, or exploring these different styles or directions you could take, with the knowing that some might not work, and that's okay. And that's part of the process, which is, the key word here that we keep talking about. But that we're going to see if something works, and it might not, and that's okay. Then we'll try something else. And kind of knowing that there's that escape hatch as part of this little project that we're working on it's freeing and nice.
Yeah, we're not on the hook to force anything to work. It can be much more freeform.
Versus like when someone commissions us to design an icon, we're like, okay, this has to get done. They paid us for it. We have to design it. It has to match Font Awesome's existing style. It has to do these things. And there's a little bit of a pressure there. Like, okay, got to get this done. And, very rarely, I'm not sure if it's happened yet, do we have to say nope, sorry, can't do it. Because that feels bad.
Yeah. And again, that's another very different process of working with the commissioned clients, because
I would think so.
Running things back and forth with them and checking that it's fitting with what they want and what they need and everything. So that's different too.
Process.
We love the process. Sometimes we don't love the process. Jory and Noah, thank you so much for taking time to talk about design process with me today.
Thank you. I think the flow of our conversation is very similar to our process, which is messy, and maybe there are nuggets of gold in there.
Ultimately futile.
Well, obviously not futile, Mr. Noah Jacobus, because look at all those thousands of beautiful icons our designers have created. So props to those guys. And thanks again, Jory and Noah, for coming on the show. So if you like what you've heard here on Podcast Awesome, go tell a pal to listen. Maybe give us a like, send us a rating and review. 5 stars always help. As always, this podcast was produced and edited by yours truly, Matt Johnson. The Font Awesome theme song was composed by Ronnie Martin, and audio mastering was done by Chris Enns at Lemon Productions.